Hi, everyone, and welcome to Empowering Exceptional Brains, the podcast where we dive into real conversations about neurodiversity, interviewing parents, individuals, and professionals to explore the challenges, strengths, and unique experiences of diverse learners and thinkers. I am your host, Maayan Glazer-Koren, an educational therapist, ADHD educator, and ASD certified specialist. Through my private practice, Educational Therapy LLC, my team and I support kids and adults with executive function and learning differences as they work toward greater confidence and independence. This podcast is a collaboration with Wiz Therapy, a platform that connects individuals with providers and helps businesses streamline their services to better support neurodiverse communities. Our goal is to share strategies, stories, and insights to help families, educators, and professionals understand and empower every kind of learner. A quick note, if you are ever concerned about your or your child's well-being or mental health, please reach out to your doctor or qualified healthcare professional for additional support. In case of emergency, please dial 911. For mental health crisis, please text 741 741 from anywhere in the United States. Thank you for joining me on this journey. Here is a quick disclaimer. The podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. The content shared on this podcast is not intended as medical, psychological, or legal advice and should not replace professional care from qualified healthcare provider or mental health professional. If you have concerns about your or your child's well-being, learning, or mental health, please consult with your doctor, therapist, or another licensed professional. The views and opinion expressed by guests are their own and do not necessarily reflect those of the host or the podcast. By listening to this podcast, you acknowledged and agree that neither the host nor guests are responsible for any actions you take based on the information shared. Hi, everybody. Today on the podcast, we have Serena Lee. Serena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for having me today. Yeah, like mine said, my name is Serena Lee. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and I'm based in Southern California. They'll be moving quickly to Chicago in just a little bit. But I'm the owner of my private practice, Soul Tea Therapy. But I'm also a staff psychotherapist at a collective of trauma therapists, and we are called Collectively We Heal. So, yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course, we talked before because the reason I ask you if you wouldn't mind to be interviewed is because we are seeing a lot of trauma,
Mhm.
especially after, we still have COVID cases, of course, and especially after the shutdown and everything that happened,
Mhm.
with the COVID-19 pandemic. And we see a lot of trauma also, not just trauma, but also different types of anxieties also happening in the schools.
Mhm.
And I think your background with that, including OCD that we discussed before, will be really important to our listeners to understand how it looks like with teens in the classroom, and what educators can look for.
Mhm.
But before there, would you mind to share what age groups do you work with and what is your specialty, and additional
Yeah,
information that can be useful to understand your background and how you come to this profession?
absolutely. I work right now primarily with young adults. I've worked with some teens. I actually have worked with kids as well. And then I basically a whole range, but for the most part right now, just because of the setup of my practice is mostly geared towards adults because of telehealth. That's where I'm kind of focusing my practice on. But I do have a handful of teenagers, and a lot of the adults that I do work with is related to childhood trauma, which I think is why it's also really important to talk about why treatment during childhood and adolescence is so important. So, yeah. I also focus on trauma, so that's my specialty. And what I notice about working in the trauma field is that it's so um, it's really connected with OCD. OCD oftentimes is a trauma response to some of the things that people have gone through. So that's where a lot of my exposure to OCD kind of comes from, is because a lot of trauma survivors come in with some of those symptoms. So, yeah.
Can you, in like few words, explain what is OCD? Because I know that many of our clients would think, oh, it's just washing hands, and but it's not.
Yeah, definitely. So I can kind of break down a little bit about some of the different parts of OCD and what that actually means. So the O part of OCD, right, is obsessions. And so these are kind of like the intrusive thoughts that just like pop into your head. And they're thoughts that we don't really want, and they cause us some sort of distress. And like most people, when they have an intrusive thought, it just kind of passes really quickly. It doesn't really bother us. And it might be like a weird thought, maybe like, oh, what if I just, what if meatballs fall from the sky? This is what I use with my teenagers. Like, what if that happens? And for a lot of people, it might be like, oh, that was a weird, funny thought. Let's just keep going. However, with people who struggle with OCD, these types of intrusive thoughts are actually quite scary, and a lot of them have very threatening themes as well. And we don't have to necessarily get into those themes, but sometimes they are based on real fears or experiences from trauma that can kind of make it spiral. Other times it could be what we more classically think of as OCD, like the, contamination or, symmetry, that kind of stuff. But there's actually a whole other side of OCD that, and the themes that we maybe not don't realize is connected to trauma. And then the compulsions part, what I think of it is more like the coping mechanism that soothes the anxiety that comes from these intrusive thoughts that are really scary. So logically, it might not really make sense that the compulsions would like actually stop the intrusive thought from happening. But the ritual or the compulsion, it's more just like a just in case it works. That's
Mm.
often what a lot of my clients will say, even if there's 1% of uncertainty with this intrusive thought happening, a little ritual doesn't really hurt, right? I might as well just do it just in case it works to stop the intrusive thought from happening. And that's avoidance. And I think OCD and a lot of different anxiety disorders are driven by avoidance and the fear of uncertainty. Um, so compulsions kind of basically tell the brain that the intrusive thoughts are indeed something to be feared. But the more, of course, the more that you avoid, the scarier it is, but the scarier it is, then the more avoidance. And then you can see where the spiral happens. So that's a kind of a long-winded way of explaining more about what exactly OCD is versus just seeing the outward symptoms of what you might see, the washing of the hands or making everything clean, et cetera, et cetera.
I have like a thought while you were like talking about it. I have like so many questions.
Yeah.
What is the link between OCD and perfectionism or being in
Hmm.
control?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good question that I think comes up for a lot of my trauma survivors who have OCD. I feel like the relationship has to do with trauma being an experience of a loss of control.
Hmm.
And it's also when trauma happens, it's generally pretty sudden. It's not expected. And it can cause like a sort of helplessness. And what I think is it's trauma is almost by nature like an assault to one's understanding of certainty, because what happened was uncertain. And especially if a child is growing up in an environment where perhaps there's abuse or there's a sort of chaos, um, there's going to be a lot of uncertainty. So naturally, OCD is a coping mechanism that often comes up because it's basically a disorder of fear of uncertainty and control, using control to cope with that fear. Um, Even though OCD can be very disruptive, for a lot of trauma survivors, it feels like a reclaiming of power that was
Mm.
stripped from them during those traumatic experiences. So it's kind of like making sure that they have control over their lives in ways that may not have been available in those chaotic environments. And it helps them feel safe and organized, when much of life wasn't.
Do you
Yeah.
see like a raise in cases, especially with the pandemic? And like I feel like everybody were like kind of OCD because everybody were like so
Hmm.
afraid. So I wonder how much of it kind of got stuck.
Mm,
Um, and in many of, I mean, for me, for example, most of my clients are have anxieties. I don't
hmm.
know how much, I don't have that many right now in my caseload that are OCD, but there are anxieties and
Hmm.
traumas. So,
Mm. Yeah, in regards to the pandemic, right? Because yeah, as a baseline, what we noticed back in 2020 was everyone was like sanitizing things,
mhm,
taking showers, using masks and gloves, and that became a norm. Um, I guess the way that I was viewing how some of my clients with OCD handled the pandemic, um, I guess a lot of them didn't really have as much of the like contamination. I think that's a part of it. I think the more underlying, maybe like the deeper level of some of the OCD themes were related to just safety in general.
mm,
Um, which I think tends to happen often with the trauma survivors, which makes sense. But um, yeah, I would have to think about that just because I think if we notice how like in trauma, when you get stuck, it often feels like you're replaying it in life because it's kind of unresolved. Like it's really common for kids to act out their trauma when they don't have the ability to articulate their experiences. So when trauma lives in your body, it creates these like emotional responses and triggers, like in our relationships or in all different sorts of contexts. And I think OCD can maybe be seen as like a sort of hypervigilance
mm,
response where we like always have to be on guard. And one of those ways in the pandemic could be like sanitizing everything, being really scared of germs. But it could also just be this overwhelming sense that fear or that danger is imminent all the time. And
right.
it brings that on edge even more. And then because the trauma is actually real in some ways, the pandemic, we can't tell an OCD client during the pandemic, like, oh, that's all, we give them reassurance. That's not true. We can't tell them that, right? But how do we help them cope with the reality that actually, yeah, you might get COVID,
Hmm.
right? And that's not the point of OCD treatment is to reassure. That plays into the cycle actually. But it's things might happen. Bad things do happen. How can we cope in a way where you don't have to live your life with the intention of avoiding things, but rather to accept what sucks and also to still live a life worth living.
That's very difficult for children
Yeah.
that are in, in middle school and or high school. And it's very difficult for many adults, to accept it,
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
life just happens and bad things
Hmm.
happens and we don't have control over
Yeah.
it. Um, and I think
Yeah.
that in many cases, and that's gonna take us to like, how it looks like in the school. But even for us, how it looks like with procrastination, right? So
Mm.
there's this piece of, okay, I'm not gonna do that. So this is the avoidance piece. It's like a vicious
Right.
cycle. very vicious
Yeah,
cycle. I mean, we all procrastinate, don't get me wrong. I mean, it's human nature.
definitely. Yeah,
And
yeah.
we all afraid, but even with with without getting into politics, but and we talked about it before when we spoke,
Mm,
even what's happening in the world right now, there is so much uncertainty um
totally.
and this like sense of safety, and how do we navigate it when we are really
Hmm.
scared? If you're looking on school shooting or what, all those other things
Yep.
that are very, very scary.
Yeah, it
Um,
is.
so what are some signs that um, a child that is navigating this lack of safety in their body, like
Hmm.
this trauma,
Yeah.
um, how can it look like in the classroom?
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good question. And I want to really normalize like what you're saying to, or just acknowledging it because the school environment now is just so different from how all of us have grown up in previous
Mm-hmm.
generations. Just because social media is like such a huge thing now, that's not the only change, but like kids are getting exposed
Right.
all day, every day to all the news of the whole world, of everything that's happening. And that's not something that like we really experienced, even as like these are young kids who are getting exposed. Um, so when you think about it through the lens of secondary trauma, for
Mm.
kids who their brains are not fully developed, it's so malleable. It's almost like, of course, they're going to feel anxious and feel the need to control and to fear uncertainty, right? Like, I have to remain really vigilant because something bad might actually happen to me. And therapy these days, even for adults, of course, that is the question is like, I can't just CBT my way through, you know, navigating real danger. What happens when there is real danger? And how does that change kind of our approach to supporting these kids? So that's kind of the context that I might answer that question is just recognizing like where kids are right now. So then if it's showing up in the classroom, um, through the eyes of a traumatized teen, or maybe someone that's really struggling with the fear of uncertainty, I might see how like the learning environment is another place to be hypervigilant because you don't have that much control over your situation. Um, One, your grades can oftentimes be a judgment of your worth, or that's what it feels like, maybe to someone who has kind of this like anxious um, or, struggle with anxiety, or sitting still can suddenly feel suffocating, or it activates a freeze response. Like peers might, approaching, they might be seen as like, potential bullies. So we like preemptively fight, we get in trouble, or we also just might avoid school altogether. Um, so I think through maybe some of these if we look at it through the lens of this like traumatized teen, um, signs that you can look for could be like a sudden decline in academic performance. And I think a lot of that can apply to different sort of
Right.
situations anyway, but you always want to flag that as like, oh, something deeper is happening, right? Having difficulties concentrating or looking really restless, like
Mm-hmm.
nervous, right? When you see hypervigilance, there's kind of this urgency, this alertness that is beyond what may be needed in the classroom. Sometimes appearing dazed or daydreaming, dissociating, right? Or less socializing, maybe some isolation with peers. There's a lot of different signs that I'm like kind of thinking about right now, but like even with like irritability, right? If
Yes.
someone is right like really on edge, yeah, of course
Mm-hmm.
they're gonna act out or feel irritable or
Lash out.
yeah, yeah. And even like physical complaints too, like difficulties eating or sleeping, right? Like it impacts the whole body, it impacts the whole human. when you're on edge like that all the time. So I guess the point with that is, yes, these are all some common things that can happen for many different mental health reasons. But I think what I'll say is that like um, these signs can certainly point to, yeah, these signs can point to other mental health conditions, but also what was making them depressed in the first place, or what was making them
Mm.
anxious in the first place. Like if there's an underlying reason, we can address that in addition to some of the surface level symptoms. So staying curious, I think, is a really key point in supporting teens who are struggling in the classroom, perhaps due to a combination of trauma or OCD kind of tendencies.
I'm thinking
Yeah.
also how it can be so misleading for
Yeah.
educators to kind of looking on a child and grades, and everything you just mentioned, and
Mm-hmm.
the irritability or fidgeting. And these are
Yeah.
signs of ADHD too. And there are
Mm-hmm.
many times, that we do have a co-occurrence with anxiety and ADHD. They are, and depression. They are very
For
good friends,
sure.
unfortunately. And and this is where like you really have to tease it out. And this is where we're gonna refer to um, uh,
Mm-hmm.
further evaluations and assessments with maybe a psychiatrist or developmental pediatrician or somebody who can really or
Yeah.
somebody in your field, right, who can really tease it out,
Right.
and say, is this ADHD? Is this anxiety? What is it? Is it both?
Yeah.
So, and then, and then I'm not going to get into the medication piece, but then the psychiatry will have to decide what are we treating. Most of the
Mm-hmm.
time, they will treat the anxiety first, and then we'll give the meds for the ADHD or both at the same time. This is
Yeah.
not not for us to decide, and this is for psychiatry, and to kind
Totally.
of the understanding, the chemicals and
Yeah.
pharmaceuticals behind this. Um,
Yeah.
but with teachers, and also not every child can afford, can get, not every child can, not every
Mm-hmm.
family, let me rephrase it. Not every family can afford, um,
Mm.
therapy. If they have insurance, they might be able to get services through the
Mm.
school. It's another piece. Are we looking on an IEP process? Are we looking on a 504 process? So if you can kind of talk a little bit about that and what
Mm-hmm.
teachers, I mean, even for teachers, like navigating this, it's very difficult because schools must be safe places for kids. Some kids have, like you
Yeah.
said, childhood traumas. Some kids, dealing with immigration and all this kind of things that are happening.
Right. Yep.
And that's hard.
Yeah. It is hard. Yeah. I want to validate that. Teachers, parents, you guys don't have to to like look at the signs and know what that is. That's a lot of pressure, and that's what
Mm-hmm.
mental health professionals are for. I will go back to the foundation of staying curious and non-judgmental towards what you're noticing, because it is difficult if your student perhaps is quote unquote acting out, or maybe what we might see is there's something just underlying that's going on, something deeper than what, is on the surface. So we have to do our best to try to use that in trauma-informed lens, um, because it is really stressful these days being a kid. And um, I think what's the new norm is exposure to real fear of schools not being safe. So having safety in the classroom, and in the systems of support is so important. Um, and we can create that sense of safety, not just with like the 504 plans and the IEPs and whatnot, but maybe it looks like creating culture in your classroom, like reinforcing ground rules for facilitating discussion. We really want to instill compassion, curiosity, critical thinking, so that it fosters like a more tolerance of difference, which I think what we see when that doesn't happen, it can lead to really terrible things. And I'll just name it, like it leads to violence, right? Um, so being able to celebrate difference in the classroom early on when the brains are still malleable and taking in all this information, um, that is so vital for kids to actually learn how to regulate their emotions is by learning how to be compassionate towards others and curious and be able to critically think. And this will tie in with OCD, but education is just so important for mental health in general. They learn to hold space for the gray in life, and that is a key skill that leads to greater, greater emotional maturity. Um, the other thing that I'm like thinking about in terms of like creating sense of safety is like checking in with your students when you
Mm.
notice that something's off. Like I tell this to my therapists, like associates and whatnot, but and other peers, like your intuition is your biggest tool.
Right.
Like your relationship is your biggest tool.
Yes.
You might not know what to do, but sometimes your job doesn't have to be doing something or
Right.
doing something more. It's actually just who you are and to be there for your student. So it never hurts to ask a question to a student to just to see how they're doing. Because what we know in research, in trauma research, is that even if there's just one positive adult in a child's life, like their vulnerability to future hardships, it significantly reduces. If you're familiar with ACEs, right, like adverse childhood experiences, in the research it shows like having any sort of protective factors, one of them being just having some sort of safe adult, they we actually set them up better as adults. So you really do make a difference in a child's life, like when you show that authentic care, even in the smallest ways, even if you don't see fruit from it, it really does matter. And kids do remember that, when they grow up, and it leads to more openness to receive support.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah,
Like the check-in is, it goes back to, no, it's not our job to kind of go and fix per se. It's be
exactly.
it's be compassionate and also teach. I don't know if teach is the right word, but
Hmm.
model self-compassion as well.
Mm.
And when things are not going very well, I have to say I'm a big fan of Kristen's Neff work and Tara Brach's.
Oh,
Like
yeah,
I
definitely.
love their stuff. Um, for our listeners, great books. I'll put them in the
Hmm.
in the comments.
No, that's great.
Self-compassion. I always tell it to my friends, clients, you name it. Self-compassion changed my life. We
Hmm.
are our worst judge. We are. I would say we
The
judge
worst
ourselves.
self-critic.
Yes, we are worst of critics,
Yeah.
and our kids do that too. And then there's shame and guilt, and I made a mistake, and all
Mm.
this kind of, oh, like they feel like they're failures. There is a failure right in their lives, and all of these, it's the trauma cycle.
Hmm.
So I
Yeah,
think that we're also looking on a lot of school trauma as well.
true.
If it's bullying or not being diagnosed with a learning difference or
Yeah.
developmental delays, that
Hmm.
can make you feel like helpless
Hmm.
and hopeless. And that's
Yeah,
the
definitely.
difficult part.
Yeah, it is. I've worked with some clients whom, we would identify as twice exceptional.
Hmm.
So like gifted kids with such a natural capacity for intellect they go under the radar.
Yeah,
They don't get identified as gifted because they're neurodiverse, right? And they end up growing up really believing like I'm stupid. I'm dumb, and I don't like school because of that. But really, they might not like school because it's really boring and it's not stimulating. Um, and I think that can also create like some cycles of trauma as well. And when we're not able to identify um, kids who are neurodiverse and need a sort of different learning support in order to realize their capacity for intellect, which is and honestly, like when some of these kids like actually find themselves in those right supports, the thriving is amazing, and we see really successful people who are living with autism or ADHD and have been able to thrive. I think that can be really hopeful too when kids can see kind of the worth that they have and the ability they have um, to contribute to the world. But unfortunately, we still have a lot of catching up to do in our school systems um, to support some of these kids that, you know, really just need that different support.
It's really
Yeah.
interesting that you said that most of my caseload are 2E.
hmm
And it doesn't
hmm
matter if they are adults or children or, or teens. Um, I do see a lot of trauma, different types of
Yeah.
traumas in these individuals. Um, and some of it is also related to, I would say, processing speed and production, what we call the executive functioning piece that comes with
Yeah.
writing and writing essays. And I spoke about it in other
Mm.
episodes and about how writing has
Mm.
so many steps. And when you have a slow processing speed or when you have challenges to sift your through your thoughts, right? And
Mm.
choose your language and what should I choose and then
Yeah.
it gets overwhelmed and then you are under pressure and stress because you need to submit and there are
Yeah.
other factors, maybe you need to do that in the classroom and it's so interesting what I know we kind of I just spoke with a teacher in a school, in elementary school, a fifth grade teacher, and she gave the kids like they need to do like the first semester, like beginning
hmm
of the year writing assessment. Okay,
Yeah.
um, she said there were, and I quote, there were so many tears,
Oh.
so many tears for these fifth graders for a
Oh my
writing
goodness.
assignment.
Mm.
So if you
Wow.
think about it, okay, not every kid there is traumatized by that, but kids that are neurodiverse and have to produce all the time and holding that pressure, that affects their
Yeah.
bodies.
Mm. hmm Yeah. That is kind of, I don't know, shocking, I suppose,
Mhm.
hearing about just almost like it was a normal thing that happened about so many tears for fifth graders regarding an essay. And it just kind of almost shows the amount of stress that they may be feeling. The essay probably in and of itself was stressful, but probably because of all the other stuff that's happening as well. Yeah, I'm not sure like how that would be adjusted, but I do think that it helps us recognize that maybe there are other ways that kids can learn where some of these, yeah, really grueling steps actually can almost be a barrier, a gatekeeping to education in some ways, or to
Absolutely.
experience worth. Yeah, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I spoke with the math piece with the last podcast, and I had math anxiety
Mm,
because I'm
hmm
dyscalculia. And I remember like I was shutting down. Oh, I said like all the things that you said. I had a tummy ache. I didn't want
mm,
to go to school.
yeah.
If there was a math test. So we do have this kind of how do we dissolve it? Okay, so let's
hmm
get to the meat of it. What language can we give teachers and parents, you know,
Hmm.
about like trying to dissolve this. We cannot take stress away. Stress,
Hmm.
there is good stress too. But what can we do? What can we give them to like, or, test
Yeah,
anxieties?
right. Well, I think there's a lot of, I mean, there's some of the more classic accommodations that students have, especially with like a 504 plan. Classic ones could be like having a separate space to take your test or headphones so that you're not overstimulated, right? Really quiet space. Having like little fidgets around while you're taking a test, especially if that can be self-soothing for anxiety or for racing thoughts. And so there's some of those more, I suppose, physical accommodations. But I think I would say I'm thinking about it in terms of like the relationship. For some reason I just keep going back to that as a piece of just of like checking in. Like communication is really helpful for kind of getting on the same page, not only with your student, but maybe if the parents and the family is supportive, like having similar expectations in the home and at school. And that can give a sort of like consistency and in some ways a helpful predictability structure. And that I think maybe if working with like a school counselor in that can kind of guide what those expectations would look like specifically for this child. So routine, helpful, like weekly check-ins, maybe with like if the parent is um like involved and a good support that like what maybe it looks like at the the beginning of each week, looking at the week and seeing which assignments are a little bit more stressful or which ones may require more time and kind of helping the child like look through some of that can bring about a sort of um yeah, like a an assurance almost of okay, I can take this day by day and I have like this support at home. And it could also look like the teacher I know there's like a ton of kids, so you can't do this for every child. That's completely, understandable. But could it be like once a month or like a biweekly basis of just checking in? Hey, I noticed like with this plan, like real a lot of like positive reinforcement in terms of what's working well. And if something isn't working well, how do I use a non-judgmental stance of just saying I notice versus of like you are not doing XYZ
Hmm.
or punishment, right? When you use a sort of curiosity, you get deeper into what's really happening. And maybe they can open up of like, I'm not getting this math. Like, this sucks, right? Versus like, I'm just going to get a bad grade or not turn in my homework. And if you notice they're not turning in homework, very likely there's probably anxiety there about it, right? Um, Yeah, other things that I can think of, especially as it relates to maybe some behavior, like if that's kind of coming up, um, is really to try to like keep, I know this might sound weird, but like keeping your cool in the sense that like your body language and even your facial expressions are there, that's communication, right?
Hmm.
Um, and the reason why I say that is because kids often feel more afraid to share about what they're going through when they feel like their problems are burdensome to others, or it'll get them in trouble, or they become a problem to be solved. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying about like not going into doing mode all the time, but that if you can hold space for that emotional connection without getting really flooded when or overwhelmed when that child is like sharing something with you, they can actually talk even more about their internal experience, and that gives you the clue into how to help. Um, yeah, so I there are a lot of things that maybe we could talk about in terms of like all these steps, but I for me at least maybe this is coming from my trauma therapy part is every child is going to be different. There won't be specific steps that you can take. And maybe that's okay for now, just because we really want to understand the child first. And the way that we do that is to get on their level and co-regulate with them as they're experiencing some of those things.
So for middle schoolers, I'm thinking this is a very big shift in their lives. It's just
Yeah,
it between elementary and high school, and it's time where there's peer pressure and
yeah,
developmentally, things are happening in their bodies, and which is natural. And then we have the bullying aspect. And you
yeah, that's a
mentioned
big
something
one.
really important. You mentioned that creating an environment of safety and culture in the school.
Yeah,
And you also mentioned the fact that they are afraid to get into trouble.
yeah,
And I hear that often.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
and this is hard because this is you don't know. Sometimes you just have to tease it out in a way that, okay, so what is going on? I
Hmm.
notice that. I wonder that, right? We use this declarative, imperative language,
Hmm.
and kind of try to kind of understand what is really going on
Yeah,
before it becomes a trauma. So if we're going to the
exactly.
roots,
Yeah,
right? We're going to how do we keep it not to go there?
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that is such a good point. And I'm no expert by any means. So I also just want to caveat that as well. Um, take everything with a grain of salt.
Yes, always.
Um, rather than having an answer, for you right now, I just like really want to acknowledge that I'm with you on that. Like sometimes we don't know what to do because it is so complex. And yeah, they might not open up to us, especially in middle school. Like that's a really tough age to understand your feelings and obviously puberty, right? Like that's a whole other change um, that can bring up a sort of insecurity with yourself. And that can be externalized through bullying. That can be internalized through perhaps depression or anxiety. And yeah, I wonder if for educators, by naming things for kids explicitly could be helpful to give language for what they're experiencing. Um, I think a lot of people can maybe struggle. They can struggle with feeling afraid if I say something, I might put an idea in their head or I might make things awkward. Let me get a drink of water real quick. Okay. They might say things that will, put something in their heads, or it can feel really awkward talking about things. But I find, at least in the therapy space, that the more that we normalize talking about something, the easier it is to talk about it. And I think for kids, that is what we're modeling for them is, yeah, it's okay to talk about feeling really awkward in my body. That may be causing me to feel very irritated towards my peers. And that be a prevention for some bullying if actually for a lot of bullies, they are going through something too. It is
Absolutely.
an externalization of trauma. So we can get them in trouble, sure. There's definitely room for accountability. And if we really want to get to kind of the root of things, this kid actually also might need a lot of support. Um, so that's a whole nother conversation about, truancy and defiance in school and getting expelled, all that stuff. Like, yes, that those are the realities. And kids, do have their own choices, but also if there's a way for us to sow seeds of I want to see you more than just the behaviors that you're externalizing. I want to see what's actually underneath the pain that you're experiencing, the chaos at home. It's all about just asking those questions for a kid who might be creating trauma for other kids who are experiencing the bullying. But also, yeah, every kid is going through something. I think that's maybe the bottom line that I'm going for.
Yeah, and also the understanding that being vulnerable is okay. I'm
Yeah,
thinking in high school, it's such a different thing. And then we have other behavioral issues.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think we need more training for teachers and for schools to, to have this kind of, especially, you know, I'm in a very good school district. My kids go to a very
Mhm.
good school district. When there is bullying, when there was bullying for my son, things were got
Mm,
resolved very quickly. And when there is like acceptance of culture, and I'm not saying it's not like, balloons, puppies, and cotton,
yeah.
candy cotton,
Mm,
but it's just like there is a little bit more. But in other places in the US, and of course we have listeners from all over, um, that, and I talked about this before too, and also the cultural and religion aspects
hmm.
of
Yeah.
something. And I'm going to circle back to OCD because one of the things that we
Yeah.
talked about before is, um, um, you know, also the family ecosystem when it comes to um, taking part in this, and also the religion piece.
Mm,
Something bad will happen to me if I don't do A, B, and C.
yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you
Yeah.
share a bit more about this?
Yeah. Boy, that one I think is a tough one. And that actually is the most common form of anxiety of OCD that I see in my clients is about morality, which is really interesting. There is a theme called scrupulosity in OCD, and that means that there is fear of, like, for example, displeasing God or sinning, needing to confess, needing to do a lot of rituals that are related to religion or spirituality in general. The spirituality, it doesn't even have to be tied to religion at all. It could just simply be about morals and am I doing it right? Whatever right means. And um, I primarily work with a lot of people who come from religious backgrounds and have had experienced religious trauma. And again, that's also a whole nother topic for later. Um, and there's also I also just want to caveat, like there's a lot of wonderful space for religion as well. So this is not like a religion is bad and it's causing OCD. That's
No,
certainly,
no,
certainly not the
no.
case. Not at all. I grew up religious. I still am, and I know you are as well. And so, yeah, definitely not saying that. However, there is a form of OCD that is related to scrupulosity, and that does not have to do with religion. What it does have to do is the sense of needing to do something right and feeling like if I don't do something right, then I'm bad, right? So with kids, since your brain is still developing, I think I said that a million times, that like um there's a lot of black and white thinking naturally. That's not out of the norm. That is developmentally, it makes sense that it's black and white. However, if we apply that to right versus wrong, we're always going to feel wrong because perfectionism is not a thing. It's just not possible. So even if a child does something like a really small thing. I see this in my teens of like, I made my friend feel bad. It's like, oh man, now I'm a bad person because
Mm-hmm.
I made them feel that way. And that can spiral to, okay, well, I'm going to apologize to my friend and I'm going to ask for reassurance and then I'm going to confess all of these things. But then the next day comes and then it's a new day of possibilities of doing something wrong. And so then the scrupulosity continues on because there's always another chance of the reality of being good changing because it's uncertain. Um, that's the scary thing with scrupulosity. I don't know if that answers your question, but we can go
What
off of
about like
that.
kids, please? No, I like it. I like it like that we're going like in different ways. It's fine.
Yeah.
I love it. This is what I love this podcast, and the listeners know
Yeah.
that I can start one way and I will end somewhere completely different.
Right.
That's my brand because I'm neurodiverse. My brain goes all over. So, and I
Yeah.
have like, oh my gosh, I have this question. So, if you're looking on that, I made them feel bad. We see that a lot in middle school. I get it, and in high school
Yeah.
and adults. But I'm thinking about people pleasers.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%.
So you're losing part
Yes.
of yourself. You're not being authentic to who you are. You're
Mm,
masking.
mhm.
And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is so much related to. I'm not saying that, eh, again, it's not like generalizing here anything about being neurodiverse and people pleaser, and that means you're OCD. No, it just like it
Yeah.
has, you see that those little kind of like roots, tiny roots
Hmm.
popping up.
Yeah. Yeah, of course. Yeah. I agree. Yeah, people pleasing I think it could be a big part of the scrupulosity or maybe OCD in general because a lot of these teenagers and adults, of course, they feel overly responsible. They're really responsible oftentimes. Um, and they actually want to do things well. So, um, when we think about it through the hypervigilance lens of trauma, of course they're wanting to do something well because that could also be a fawn response. If I please this person, they're not going to hurt me.
Mm,
And scrupulosity, that's kind of the same thing. If God is in the picture for them, if I sin, I have to confess so God doesn't punish me. Right? That's the same logic, right? So that is also in trauma. If I please my abusive parent or sibling or whatever, then they're not going to abuse me. So that's also kind of an interesting sign that maybe educators can look for is like being very perfectionist and people pleasing, um, and very afraid of making a mistake and being curious about that and where that's coming from. If they feel like, oh, my teacher's going to get really mad at me, explore that. Just be like, oh, I I see your mistake and just normalizing that it's okay to make mistakes and that you want to support them. Really easy, natural way of um, supporting a kid who's going through that, but could speak volumes for a kid who may be scrupulous. And again, a kid may have no religious background, parents and family very supportive. Everything could be perfect, and still a kid could have scrupulous OCD, and that also happens too,
mhm.
because as I had said, with social media and a lot of corruption in the world, they are exposed to what it would look like if you do something wrong. So it doesn't have to come from the home or school, but it's just in general, this is the world that we live in. And um, things, obviously there's like a biological, genetic components as well. But yeah, there's a lot of overlap for all these different things. And I think that's why it's probably important to talk to mental health professionals so that they can help parse out what is happening versus our kind of own interpretation. You can kind of get that feedback. So, yeah.
Oh my gosh, Serena, I could not even finish this podcast better than that what you just said. We just we just have to make sure that even as educators, we also check in with ourselves and support
Yeah,
ourselves when we get
for
into the
sure.
classroom so we can support our kids. because our kids,
Yeah.
they come from different backgrounds, and you never know.
Hmm. Yeah. I think that's a great like way to wrap up too, because I also recognize it's really hard to be an educator these days. And you all have a lot of challenges, not just with managing all these different types of um, traumatic situations or scenarios with navigating relationship with students, but also you're like it's a heavy job sometimes and burnout is real. And that's why like there's unions and things because sometimes I mean I'll just call it like yeah, sometimes it's low pay and that sucks. And teachers do deserve a lot of love and support too so that you can be there for your kids and that sort of advocacy, maybe my social work part is coming out now regarding that, but I think maybe we can end with just this sort of gratitude for what you all have been doing for these kids in a time when it feels quite unprecedented and we're just like building the plane while it's flying, and that is amazing and sometimes unfair, but also I just hope that you all feel appreciated and seen in the work that you do.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. You gave me goosebumps. Thank you, Serena, for coming to this podcast. I would love to have you come again and talk more about other topics.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it and hope you all um are able to, thrive in your spaces and yeah, the kids are lucky to have you all.